313?
313, March.
Oh, 313.
Yeah. All right. So thanks everybody for being here. Appreciate that. And members of the public. We have an agenda. I know that there may be some questions or other ideas brought forward. Not necessarily going to go in the order because, you know, that's just way too much for me. I like to skip around. Sean, what's on everybody's mind? And if you don't mind, right out of the gate, we're going to go to number 2 about the Narberth Avenue Bridge. Any updates or information you'd like to share with the committee from a public safety perspective?
Yeah. The information is always evolving, and we do have an update since as of we met last Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
Time flies. On Thursday, an inspection team from Pannoni went out and looked at, got as close as they could to the understructure that supports the sidewalks of the inbound and outbound side of the bridge. They concurred with the decision to close the sidewalks because they found the bridge, the sidewalk structures to be moving under very light loads, and that gave them cause for concern. So they concur with that decision to close and keep closed the sidewalks for the time being. They were unable, because they didn't have access to get on the tracks, unable to do a hands-on visual inspection. That's going to be done in April. That's going to be done by the bridge inspection team from PennDOT as part of their normal annual cycle of inspecting the bridge, which is now 6 months overdue. So once we get that information and Jennifer from Pannoni is able to review that, she can make a determination as to what repairs or reopening possibilities there are for the sidewalks. The bridge is currently still remains with a load rating of 9 tons. It can carry vehicles across it. The biggest danger to the bridge is not necessarily vehicles going over to it, but the freeze-thaw cycle that happens in wintertime. We'll know more after the inspection in April whether the load rating changes. It's unlikely it will because it's been that way for a while, but we'll wait and see. So we'll know more in April once that is done. So for the time being, the sidewalks shall remain closed regardless of what council wants to do with the roadway, and the choice to keep the roadway open to pedestrians is the safest option for pedestrians and bikes to get across the bridge for the time being. We are still having the traffic engineer investigate a possibility of doing modified vehicle travel over the bridge, what that really means is either a one-way traffic flow or a bi-directional traffic flow that's controlled using one lane and then using the remaining space in the cartway and the roadway as a bike pad access. But for now, we got to keep the sidewalks closed, and we are actually looking back at throw another variable into the picture, our traffic control plan for construction during the bridge. We're actually looking at modifying that so that we don't even need the inbound and outbound sidewalks to manage pedestrians during construction. Therefore, we might have the opportunity, if they can support their own weight, if the sidewalks can support their own weight for another year or 16 months before construction starts, that we can get by without having to spend any money on repairs that will end up demoing those repairs at a later date. Keep in mind that we are on the hook, however, for the cost to install the vertical shielding, and we're getting estimates on that. So that's kind of a non-negotiable place we're at right now.
Ms. McGreevy, any questions?
It's just a point of information. Do we have any control over the length of the green light coming out of the tunnel? Is that beyond the borough's jurisdiction? Like how long that green light lasts?
We don't have control over signal timing. That does.
Okay. Just because there's more traffic now going through the tunnel.
Sure.
And people have mentioned to me.
Sure.
Could we extend the green light?
Sure.
Okay.
Something to consider.
Yeah, we'll look into that.
Chief Gallagher, anything? Questions? Fran, any questions?
No.
Mayor?
No.
Yes, actually, I walked this and I had a couple neighbors talk to me about it yesterday. Could we add some detour signs? So what happens when people are coming, they see the bridge is closed, they are annoyed, head left down Elmwood and hit that dead end. And then race back around. There, in the past, I think we put a detour sign at Woodside to go left so people knew. So we detour that a little better?
So we can't detour traffic onto a state road without PennDOT's concurrence, which means they have to review it and sign off on it. So I didn't want to make any pronouncements about that last week.
Okay.
But at the meeting on Thursday, I asked Jennifer and PennDOT to look into a detour that would do just exactly what you said. Maybe not Woodside. We don't know if it would be Chestnut Woodside.
Okay.
I got the plans yesterday
Sure.
in the afternoon. But we have PennDOT's concurrence to do that at this point, so now we are able to sign.
Okay, all right, let folks
We
know.
could also possibly, as you go down Elmwood, there's a turnoff point before you get to the end, and just direct people to turn off before they get to the dead end and get stuck. That might be another option, in case they go down Elmwood.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right.
All right, we're going to skip ahead. We asked this committee, I'm going to move ahead to Chief Gallagher's piece here. Sorry. Okay. This committee, we had a conversation last month about reviewing the information that came from the matrix report and those high, medium, and low priorities, and where we were at with that assessment and actually correcting or making plans and successes for the changes needed in our department. So Chief Gallagher did his due diligence and sent us a really nice spreadsheet. Thank you, sir. And then sent us an update of the status of the police department and really explaining what's currently happening and what the successes have been. And if the public or if anybody hasn't looked at that report or hasn't seen that public piece, I suggest you do so if you care about it. And that the information that's provided here and certainly the pieces that
I say this when it's a public meeting, correct?
I'm sorry.
Redacted, so cannot be discussed
Right
now.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So there are some pieces right on that list that the chief has given us that will be are not meant for the public.
Right.
So there you have it. And won't be discussed at this time. So I will say, and John knows this, the pieces that concerned us the most have been addressed, and that was discussed not just in John's interview when he was hired, but the conversations that needed to be, that going forward in the last almost year, about making those serious changes and the hard work that has gone into it. So I thank you very much. But it's up to this committee to review it, and our portion of it, of course, is to, right, so this is checks and balances and to provide oversight. That's our job. We also control the purse strings, so a little bit of that is those conversations on what are the successes, what's our expectation, and how we see things going forward. I've said it before, I will say it again, that your department, any department that's here, should be up for review every 3 to 5 years. And that's not because we think anything horrible is happening, but because you need a new set of data points and information going forward. Maybe not to the full extent, but maybe there are pieces that need to be addressed, vehicles, technology, whatever is deemed. I think that the rest, everybody here should keep that on their radar, knowing that when this report was given to us and the timeline going forward. And to that end, you see the information. Does the committee have any questions other than the redacted portions of what, any questions or ideas or a different set of information needed at this time? Mayor?
No, I mean, we're working our way through the different elements. We're making we've made a lot of changes since the chief has come on board. I think we're progressing in a very reasonable manner in terms of updating and professionalizing everything that is within our control.
Right, so I think that some of the pieces that, I don't want to say jumped out at me, but refreshed my memory about this particular document are some of the smaller pieces. And John, I think you addressed some of it, yearly audits of the receipts that you're issuing to the public when cash or credit cards or PayPal is being taken in. So that's, that's there. There are some financial control pieces that I think where am I? That you have already implemented with the work of the office, so I thank you for that. There's a piece here, and what we're talking about are the policies that this committee should consider. And there's one, if I can find it, that jumped out at me that we have to consider. And it's council should establish through charter change or legislative vote, establishing the chain of command that includes the borough manager. Now we do that because we all work together right? And we've had that conversation of who reports to whom and how pieces and information should be shared between, I think, all of our, committees, our public safety and information. I don't think that anybody is looking to, I know Sean's not, looking to take over the police department, but sharing information and bringing it back to the to this committee and council as a whole is a larger piece. And John has done his due diligence in bringing a lot of information forward. But that's a piece of legislation that we should consider. That's what jumped out at me. There are some pieces here, when we talk about our agreement with Lower Merion or any other entity, as we do business under the police department. I think that yearly reviews, and we know that that's happening, officer reviews, and we know that the mayor will go forward at John's 1-year mark and make a review of his status as an employee here. There are smaller pieces. It's, as I said, there's nothing. John has done extremely well in providing a lot of oversight and improvements to our department. There are pieces that will change going forward. Hence, I said there are moments where you're going to have to go back and review and say, well, maybe we have the basics down. What's the next step? And of course, all of that rides on the financial piece, right? So not just the CIP piece, but the larger financial dollars as well. Anybody have any questions about what's being presented?
So just to review, what you did, John, was you pulled the high priority items from Matrix, and those are the ones that are supposed to be addressed first, and then within a year or so, move to the medium item. Is that the idea?
Just to give everybody my idea what we should do moving forward with the Matrix report, because we all live in that document to an extent based on the study that was done by the police department. They've done tremendous work. It's a 50-page document, which is excellent. It's on point. I've actually had a conversation with John Scruggs briefly about it from Matrix. I'm very familiar with the document, but there's also things that I've recognized that are very much a priority for the department outside the Matrix report, just based on my experience and my background. Some of those things are actually classified under others. So my intention is, as Rob said, to identify all the high priorities for the first report and summarize them from each category. And if you go to the Matrix report and you look at financial all the way down to communications, you'll see that they're in rank order on that report. The next report that will be available for our April Public Safety Committee meeting will be the medium. And then in addition to that, the following month in May will be the low. So we'll see where we are. It's going to kind of be a living document for each, because as we start to complete different categories, which are uncompleted or in progress right now, we're obviously going to have a check-off system. So those are important. But the one thing to take into consideration is that they are living documents, and there's certain things that are going to change, and we are going to have to move the goalpost on some different areas. Some of it's budget related, some of it's monetary constraints. Other things, it's just not practical. I'll give you an example. This one thing I had mentioned to Sean, and the one thing I've mentioned to the mayor repeatedly is in the recommendation, even though set as a low priority for Matrix, they said that we should have light bars on all 3 of our marked vehicles. Well, if anybody notices, our light systems on our vehicles are more than clear. People can see our vehicles. That would be an unnecessary expense for the borough to travel down into. So that's not prudent. That's not pragmatic. So even though it's set as a low priority, I don't know how much of it should have been actually on that list anyway. If you have a marked vehicle and it has those lights, you can make a vehicle stop. Those lights are clearly marked and they work. Everything's operable. The other thing that was not mentioned, that I didn't even mention on this report that I set as a priority, is you have to have a preventive maintenance schedule for your fleet. We have 5 vehicles now in the fleet for police, and that also includes the parking controller's vehicle. So every so often, we're tracking inspections and emissions. We're tracking oil changes that are required, any recalls that are given to us by factory notification. Those things are addressed for safety and offset any risk management concerns for the borough. Because we always have to be concerned about liability. Some of the biggest dangers that are imposed to us in concerns of liability may be vehicle related. If there's an accident, if there's an injury sustained from something that happens with our fleet. So those are some of the things just to talk about. As we see here in other, those are the things that I've identified as a priority in my opinion, based on chief. So the others don't necessarily appear, all of them, in the matrix report on recommendations, but some of them do. It's just I set them as priorities and got them done, along with the help with the officers. And I like to mention the officers done a tremendous job on a lot of these things. I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without the team. They share in the philosophy, they buy in it, they like the direction that the department is going. The morale, I see a difference, I see an improvement, I certainly see a cooperative spirit from the officers, which is unprecedented. And they are responsible for really helping get a lot of this done. And I'd really like to take the time to thank the team. And also to thank borough leadership for their support, because there's a lot of things in here that were unforeseen. For instance, that we had to take in front of the Public Safety Committee, things that we had to take in front of F&A, and then ultimately council for a vote. So we had a lot of support from the mayor and the leadership in the borough.
Right.
So I certainly appreciate that. But I believe that this is a good comprehensive list to draw comparisons and benchmark against the matrix report. But again, I think there's going to be other priorities they're going to set as we go along. Again, we have to look at what is the vision for for the police department. 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. How do we maintain? How do we standardize? And how do we professionalize and benchmark and make sure that we are just the same as other similarly sized departments and that we're meeting the requirements? Now, the one thing that you see in here is we've met a lot of compliance areas, not only with clean, but also with training and certification database with the Pennsylvania State Police. The one thing to point out with this, most important, is our database is now current. When I first got there, the database was in disrepair. It was all over the place, and it took a lot of work to clean it up. So that's done. And from the help of the corporal from the state police, we've gotten clean restored, NCIC restored, and we're going in a good direction. And in the MOU, we met with Lower Merion on January the 30th. We provided the changes and the edits that we think protect the borough's interest at heart, the residents, the taxpayers, moving forward. And now we just have to finalize that. That ultimately will be signed by myself, the borough manager, Superintendent Mike McGrath, and their township manager. So that's in progress, and it's close to being a punch point that's done on the list. So I think there's a lot of progress that we made, and I'm really, really proud of this department moving forward. And I think we've done a tremendous job. And I think one of the biggest marks of success is the compliments that we've gotten from our residents, the people we serve. This is a customer service driven organization. What have you done for lately? What is the presence? What are the deliverables to the community? The feedback that we're getting from the community has been overwhelmingly positive. Now, we certainly get complaints and we deal with them accordingly, and none of that are ignored, and we take that to heart, and we have to see and we act appropriately. But I can tell you overall, the feedback that we've gotten is in particular about traffic enforcement that has been upped in the borough. Where we're doing warnings, we're stopping vehicles, we're writing traffic citations, we're taking a zero tolerance approach to certain areas. We're trying to safeguard children. The other feedback that we're getting is the new school outreach, how we're reaching out to schools, daycare centers, learning centers, trying to keep them safe. Also, too, the financial, I'll give you an example yesterday. Unfortunately, there was a bank robbery that occurred in Lower Merion Township. Myself and Officer McCabe, he did a tremendous job yesterday, deployed right away to the banks, letting them know that there was a bank robbery inside Lower Merion Township, to be on the lookout for wherever the person was, make sure that they contact 911 and call county radio if you find any suspicious activity outside your bank. So we deployed right away, and we covered Montgomery Avenue to make sure that that person, if they came into the borough, we would like to think in our heart of hearts that we would have seen it and we would have been able to react. So these are the things that we're doing now, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback about that. So I think, and I'm a true believer, that our traffic citation issuance and the way we now enforce traffic has had a corresponding effect on the number of traffic accidents that we see reported in our record management system. So we see a lessening, a reduction in that area. So I give credit to the officers for a lot of this good work that's been done.
Thank you, John. And yes, and we certainly do commend the department as a whole for making these changes. And it's a cultural change as well. We went a long time needing a shift, and so thank you for your leadership. You brought up a couple of things I want to touch on. The MOU, I think that this committee received the previous and then the draft that the chief and the mayor have been working on. And then, of course, it would have to go to Mr. Walco, and we'll have that conversation about that piece going forward. And then, of course, the borough manager signing it. One of the things, John, that I wanted to touch on, and it's not, there's nothing, no ulterior motive. Part of, what got us this matrix report was that we don't have published police policies. Our neighbors all have them in other departments, and I know you're working on that, and that's something that we have to really get a timeline down on and when that's going to be complete sooner rather than later. Mr. Walco has suggested to me that this needs to be on our website so that we're all aware. And one of the pieces that he has included is, and I know we're not going to have this, that in the past, there was no mechanism for a member of the public other than to come and speak to the mayor, to have a complaint if there were a serious complaint against an officer. I think that's a document and information piece that needs to be worked on as well, sooner rather than later. I don't think that that's particularly a challenging component. But we do have to have that mechanism forward going out to the public, because that is part of the public trust. And having lived here, as all of you have, we know that that was a part of the conversation from the community back to saying, I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. Speaking to one individual or another and not actually having a formal process in place. So I would suggest that as much as we're looking at the MOU, the policy piece and the complaint against should be prepared sooner rather than later. And tell me what you think the timeline is going to be for the...
So I don't specifically have a timeline for that. We are working on the policies and updating. There was a lot of updating to do. We will work on that to advance that.
So you think September, October,
if I
before the
may,
year's out? I'm just trying to get a...
Just to weigh in,
Right.
for instance, the policy that you talk about, how we report complaints against police personnel, how we investigate complaints against
Right.
police personnel. That is obviously something, for instance, as we look at our directives and our general orders that are in the police department, many of them are more than 16 years old, so
Yeah.
they have to be updated. They are not contemporary,
Sure.
they are not standard. So I'm fleshing through them one by one and redoing them. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, the Public Safety Committee, the borough manager, and the mayor, obviously, is my direct report, has received about 4 to 5 so far that we've rewritten from top to bottom. Now, some of those directives, I believe it's in our best interest to take some of that redundancy that appears in the directives and in those general orders and make sure consolidation takes effect.
Sure.
Because we have to streamline the process. You have to have direct information that can be accessible, not only to police personnel, but whatever is available to the public if it's, if there's issues that come up. However, the one thing to take into consideration is we could go to the Pennsylvania Chiefs Association, of which the Narberth Police Department is now a member. We could go to the FBI National Academy Associates. We could get policies that act as a blanket for any police department. However, the one thing that I have a problem with is it's not necessarily germane to your borough. It's not a one-size-fits-all, a set of directives. You have to painstakingly, in my opinion, professionally go through each directive and rewrite them to where they're conducive to the needs of the community which you serve.
Right.
So what I currently have now is, in the monthly report, we all have that information, the number of complaints against police that are filed on a month-to-month basis, and they are investigated. Now, we don't have a policy necessarily to back that up, but I can tell you, we did so far have one, and that was investigated. It turned out to be nothing without revealing too much detail about it. But I think the one message that we really want to get to the public, that is, if they have a complaint against a police officer, by all means, these are positions of trust. We want integrity, we want honor, and we want service. So with that in mind, it's my job to provide leadership, direction, and control to the department. But, most important, the communication piece has to be there. The public needs to know that if there's a complaint against a police officer, please come and see the chief of police, and it will be handled accordingly. And they can be reassured that there will be circled back to them to let them know what the results of the investigation are. So I think those things need to be broken down in the policy.
We can get a policy done. We can formulate an official policy, and we'll do that. We'll
So I think, and I appreciate what you're saying, and we'll get there, is that, and I appreciate the circle back, but the component is the communication to this entity. And so although you and the mayor are working on that, there are 7 of us who sit here, and they'll ask Cindy what happened, and they might ask Bob, or they'll ask Rob what happened, and we'll go, I didn't know anything about it. And maybe we're not going to know anything about it. But if there is some amount of conversation in the seriousness and the weight of such a complaint or such a question being brought forward, we would appreciate, a two-way street communication so that not to go out into the community and usurp your authority or your information, but to certainly say, council is aware and it's being investigated. So I think that's all that piece will work.
Sorry, there is an element of that in the current police reports that are given monthly.
Yes.
And that there is a police complaints against police. That is itemized. That's an itemized, a new itemized list.
Yes.
That you're at least being made aware of.
Yes.
Yes.
Cindy?
My only comment is, again, without saying too much, I
Right.
understand that there's been a cultural shift, but I had a problem with a former police officer in
Yes.
Narberth. And this is a small town, and there is kind of a fear of,
Yes.
I don't want to use the word retribution, but there is a difficulty in reporting a complaint
Yes.
directly to the chief. So
Yes.
if there was
Yes.
a system where
Yes.
perhaps it went to the office, where there was more of a form
Right.
that then got filtered down.
So I do think it is that portion that we were talking about, that communication piece, as well as saying there is some legislative piece that says this is the command and this is the information that's being shared. So I think you speak to my point, which is to say that all of these are sort of connected in the communication piece, so that we're not in the dark, or so that the community, as you said, feels like they can say something without a fear of retribution or retaliation or disinformation being presented back to them. And it is just checks and balances. And our officers are employees, and they do have a contract and a level of protection. And this is not about gossip and answers. This is about being just aware of the circumstances that, and there's a liability. And so, of course, there's that communication piece is key. So that command piece of where the information goes to, whether it's Mr. Metric or back to council, and that's that legislative piece that was brought to the attention in the report.
All right, so we can move forward and create a structural policy on that. If someone is not currently, if someone is not comfortable going to the chief, I am available almost all week, or by phone or by email. Certainly, I would be the one, a person to address.
Sure.
And be approached if a member of the community does have a problem with a police officer.
So if we could by next month's meeting have a conversation about the MOU, any projection, and you can give me a false deadline. I'll even take that, about the policy manual and procedures, and some amount, maybe something to review. You'll give me some idea of where we're headed for complaints against police as an official document or procedure, and we will look at the side of that piece of legislation should we want to bring it forward and have a conversation here. And I think there is a technology piece that needs to be addressed, and we've heard it across the country. Unfortunately, the national conversation is right here about the technology pieces, the storing of information, who sees the electronic information, where it goes, how long we have it, who has access to it, and when does it get dumped. So this is of great concern to me. Collecting data on my neighbors is not something I particularly am interested in doing, and I feel is an intrusion. I think there's a certain level of information under policing, and even perhaps in the fire department, and you have to have some amount of information at your hands. However, those pieces, we've heard it about body cameras, we've heard it about these tag readers, we've heard it about a number of technology pieces as we move forward in the culture and in the world that are concerning. And I'd like to see those policies directly and actively put forward about the information being stored, where it's being stored, and of course all the background pieces, the price, the impact, how long the contracts are for, and where that information is being stored and the access of it. So if we get a timeline on that, or information on that for the next meeting, I would greatly appreciate it. Anything you've got. We know it's a starting off point. Thank you for your patience. Anything else for the police department? Thank you. Fran, do you have anything you want to tell us about the fire department?
It was a quiet month, which we all
Yay!
enjoyed. Only 19 calls, 2 in the borough, assists to Bryn Mawr, Gladwin, and Armour once, and to Kinwood once. There were no bad or significant calls in our district or in the borough. We were in service for 5 hours, 52 minutes. We had close to 10 hours of training, and unfortunately, firefighter George Constantine, who served the company and the community as an active member for more than 50 years, passed away on February 14th. And other than George's tragic passing, there were no other changes to the active members list.
Thank you, Fran. Fran, any consideration by you or the fire department about coming up with some sort of data points or information about costs regarding the calls?
We've been looking into that. as I said, everything, it's hard to say what a common denominator would be. Some calls are over in 2 minutes, and some calls last for 2 hours, and so we're
certainly
looking.
could categorize those. You know, we're just looking for a ballpark, Fran. We're not looking for scientific accuracy.
Right.
We just want to get in a field and be able to have that conversation with lower
We're looking into it, but as I said, just with the wide variety of everything that you go to, it's difficult to categorize. But that is a work in progress.
So maybe something by May, by April,
Hopefully,
by May?
yeah.
Okay, great. That would be great. Thanks, Fran. I appreciate that. And if you guys need to go and get on to other business, we appreciate you being here, and thank you for all your information. But if you have to go, we understand. Next up, I think let's talk about parking enforcement systems, which is on everybody's mind. And I did see Robin, our parking authority, out yesterday with the new handheld. And so I'm glad it's out there working, and that she's able to use it and go forward in making the corrections to the parking issues in the borough currently. So, Mr. Meckwick, or maybe it's Matt, I don't know who has the floor.
Well, I'm happy to say I'm not an expert in our parking enforcement system.
Right.
Matt knows the implementation and administrative side. Robin knows the execution. The officers are also trained in how it works, and we're managing the back end data management part of it, making sure that it's functioning properly. But the new system is going to force our hands as a collective body and as a legislative body and for us to discuss how we manage parking in the borough going forward. There was one example that came up this week where the new park, it was past practice to allow persons who maybe didn't have a parking permit, or maybe they had relatives or someone who worked for them who wasn't entitled to get a parking permit, to call the office up and ask permission for their cars and names to be placed on a list of persons that would not be ticketed. And we didn't have any authorization in the ordinance to continue this practice. It had never been in place, but we didn't change that because that's kind of the practice that I had inherited. The office had inherited going in 2016. Fast forward to 2019 with a new system. The new system does not support that kind of activity, and it forces us to have the question, if you want to have temporary parking privileges, the system can support that outcome. You can purchase, the system can enable users to purchase time-limited parking permits for residential zones if you want to continue that practice. But we can't continue the status quo, which is drop a dime, call the office up and say so-and-so is here, and then we don't verify that, and there's really no check and balance on that. So that practice has stopped, but you might, as an elected officials, you might get feedback from the community about that and wanting to continue that. And that's a conversation we have to have about policy that's woven into some other outcomes. So I want you to know that we're going to be continuing to talk about policy issues going forward and very soon, as we both work with the system and try and organize that conversation.
Okay. Matt, anything to add?
This system is everything that I wish the previous system was. So the answer to any question about, can the system do this, is yes. To Sean's point, it does force us to have these philosophical conversations.
Well, it goes beyond philosophy because we have to change the ordinance, but I hear you.
To begin with, philosophical, and then put it into practical and real. And one of the things that we learned through this exercise is one of the missing pieces with the previous system was that it did not connect to the state, and so any unpaid parking tickets just weren't getting sent to the state because the developer couldn't figure it out. This system was selected because they are a Pennsylvania company, and their bread and butter is Pennsylvania citations. They know the system. This system is in the queue to be turned on with e-filing with the state starting in June. And In the meantime, we will be issuing paper citations through this system. So every ticket that's not paid per our laws, our ordinances, any unpaid ticket after 10 days will be forwarded to the court for hearing. I say all of that to say that through this exercise and working with the developer and the state AOPC, they are the state mechanism that deals with ticketing to disseminate information down to the courts, is that our legislation has to be bulletproof. In order to be upheld in the court of law, it has to be bulletproof. And so if we, John, Sean, and I have had lengthy conversations about this, that if we have any holes in our ordinances that say there's this visitor list and there's no visitor list on the laws, and we issue a ticket for expired time zone, and we say, oh, I was on the list, first thing they're going to say is, where's this list? Tell me about this list. We can't have any holes in our legislation. So we've done a great reduction in exceptions, and we are following our ordinance to T, because one of the exercises was we were to look at our tickets in our system, where it was supported in our ordinances. In order for us to issue a state citation, the state actually goes and reviews it. I worked with Officer Lynn to, here's our parking ticket, here's where it's upheld in our local ordinance. They have it, it's on file. If we deviate from that, the case is going to be blown up. So that's where we're at.
And understand that the state has the authority to review that document and come back to us and or reject anything that's put forward. They have that authority. And so even though we just wrote it, or maybe we haven't written it in 30 years, then we have to absolutely make sure that the I's and the T's are taken care of. I will say, and to this list idea is a larger piece that in a conversation I had yesterday, we have more than one business corridor in this community, and the Iona corridor is one of those. They are meterless currently, they are parking passless, and so part of that business community has absolutely said, and I don't know where we stand on it, but I'm just bringing it forward, are these pieces about employees. And what that looks like in a system that we have would be, now I've told the story before that long ago when Penn was taking over part of Philadelphia, they decided that businesses would have a certain amount of parking passes in order to sort of revitalize those neighborhoods and to say that there's cars and businesses coming in. So we were given 2 passes. I've heard from businesses in the Iona corridor yesterday even, employees still receiving tickets because they're, it's been 2 hours. And maybe that, and it does speak to not just the ticketing piece, but it does speak to that larger piece of what are those zones going to be? What is it? Does everything still need to be a 2 hour, eliminating the 2 hours? That's those larger pieces going forward. But they do pay a business privilege tax. We don't have authority over that percentage of tax. That comes from the state, and that was capped. Eugene DePasquale, if you hear me, again, we'd like to have that conversation about that number. I would. Certainly, a consideration should be a certain number of employee passes for businesses that are paying their tax and presenting a service or idea or value to the community. That's not our judgment, but that's just to say that there are businesses here that are thriving, that they have employees and they come from somewhere else, and those employees shouldn't be ticketed because they can't. It kind of goes against working here if you're paying a $15 ticket 2 times, 3 times a week.
So our legislation is pretty specific in commercial permits. Mm-hmm. So first of all, the mechanism is that a residential parking permit zone has to be on that block. If you are a commercial entity, our legislation is currently written, says you have to take the frontage of that business, divide it by 22.
Oh, I remember this.
And then you get 2 parking permits per whole number. So we had a case that came in this last week. Their frontage was 13 feet.
Right.
What do you do with that, right?
Yeah.
So again, to Sean's point, this is forcing our hand to have these bigger conversations that our parking management, our parking philosophy and structure reality needs to be overhauled, needs to be looked at, needs to be.
You bring my point home.
And using the parking study as our guide, and say now we have a system that can actually do what we need it to do.
Right. And that's a priority of council, is to redo all of the parking.
I'm going to say it's a priority of the office too. I mean, this is something that we deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's It's the seed stuck in everybody's tooth.
Right.
Go, I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
software. So the new system is not going to be retroactive come June 2019, correct? So if you have outstanding parking tickets at this point, there's really no way to hold people accountable.
Oh, it's from the old system. So if you've interacted with our website, and if you click on the pay parking ticket icon, it gives you two options because the tickets look completely different.
Yeah.
We still have two payment technologies right now. We still have two parking systems. The new system has been in use for 2 weeks now. And so any tickets issued from the old system, it was cost prohibitive for us to take those unpaid
Exactly correct.
tickets
That was my question.
and bake in.
Okay,
But as of 2 weeks ago, this system, we will be issuing citations, paper form.
Got it.
Until the switch gets turned on in June.
okay, that's all.
Okay.
Just was wondering.
Mayor?
I was going someplace and I got turned around.
I'll buy you time.
Just keep by me time.
Okay. So now that we have this technology, because of all your work, we're in a position to really use the parking study to make some policy
Yeah.
decisions.
Yeah.
So, but those decisions would span this committee and infrastructure?
And infrastructure, so.
So I was just thinking, how do we, I'm just thinking ahead, how we want to coordinate that work across committees or...
Well, certainly with the help of the office and the information coming from the system and the police department, we do have the matrix. I'm sorry, not the matrix, I'm sorry. We do have the parking study that sort of guides us and has recommendations as in this report. So I think that's something that this committee should review, obviously, and that I know in my conversation with Mr. Weisbord that those conversations going back and forth will have to happen, I guess, at the first meeting of the month. I don't know what we call it anymore. Anyway, that meeting, and look at the listed priorities. So certainly, this committee should review the parking study, and anybody should review it. And if you have ideas, concerns, bring them forward. And certainly, we'll just make a priority list. And as we said, for hearing from businesses or hearing from the visitor list, and and other components going forward. We know that in my opinion, the parking spaces are painted and they're too large. We could be fitting other cars in a business corridor that has those lines and has those meters because we have these gigantic, overly sized parking spaces. Now she remembers, sorry.
As someone who was working in the business corridor, particularly out on Iona Avenue, I understand the difficulties of having employees, and it's a common theme throughout the borough. It's my opinion that it's very important to provide some area for employees because it becomes a real issue with businesses, and we want to be able to find a cooperation effort.
Sure.
Can I ask a question to the point then? Sabine is a block away, and we just said via the Sabine study, there's an abundance of parking spaces right now. Is there any reason why employees could not be parking in Sabine?
No, in fact, we've encouraged it in my entire time here. We've said, please park at Sabine, walk 2 blocks back to the business. Or, if this was available for a hot minute until we had some discussion, the folks parked here and walked up the street. And so I don't think that's unreasonable.
And that's actually what the office communicates
Yes.
to business owners that come in or call, where are my employees supposed to park? We say, well, anywhere that's not signed, free game.
Right.
And there is, if you're up in that corridor, Sabine Avenue, or if you're down Haverford, down here. We've got all this parking down here in the borough.
And I think that's important for us to be on the same page and say that as well, because I would assume businesses would say, given the limited parking there, if it's between a paying customer and an employee, if I was an owner, I would certainly want my employee to park in Sabine.
So this has come up before. I remember this was an issue. This has been a recurring issue throughout
18 years.
As long as I've lived in Narberth. One of the issues, and you have folks who come in from Philadelphia who've moved from Philadelphia and are used to parking 3-4 blocks away and walking and think, wow, parking jackpot. I'm only 4 blocks away from work.
Right.
There's a different mindset we have to overcome a little bit. Cultural shift in the borough where folks are like, well, parking out down by Borough Hall, that's so far from where I work. And so we're going to, and I'm an advocate for parking and walking and making space for the customers. I mean, I really think it's an important part of business. But we will have to change some minds and encourage folks to walk a couple blocks.
I agree.
And that's okay.
And good weather is upon us. So
It is.
this is an opportunity to build that piece in.
When it's pouring rain, it's not.
Not so great.
Not as good.
None of us. None of us. But there is that,
But just
I
understand that there will be a mindset and a little bit of a
Sure.
cultural shift
Sure.
to go through that.
Fran, anything? I do think that there's I'm sorry, John, go right ahead. Do you have
I think
anything?
one of the biggest problems that I've seen so far in 10 months that I've been here with parking, and I know the officers concur, is we don't have, which limits a lot of space, and I've discussed this with the mayor, and she agrees, is we don't have our residents using their driveways. It's creating a lot of congestion.
Oh, we're going to
on
get there. It's
streets.
on the list, John.
And by all means, we
It's
need
on
to
the list.
really send the message out to the residents. By all means, use driveways. Now, in regards to the visitor list, I can tell you, and I had conversations with the mayor over the weekend. I stay in constant communication with the mayor. Pennsylvania Borough Code requires that the police chief report to the mayor and make sure that she has the information or he has the information. Over the weekend, I've received very, very few complaints about the discontinuation of the visitor list. So maybe one or two, not that many, easy to resolve. But one of the things that I've noticed is that, people that were in fact calling weren't necessarily paying attention to the information that was disseminated.
Yes.
We do not have enforcement on 2-hour zones between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. We do not have enforcement on 2-hour zones throughout the borough on the weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays, and rarely holidays as well. In addition to that, we've given the options and alternatives for people to park at 201 Sabine, park at 100 Conway to the rear. And also, we have the message, now people are going to get into an area like, well, the 2-hour zones, it's frustrating. Well, based on the fact that we have a transportation hub, if we didn't have a 2-hour zone, you could have people that are working in downtown Philadelphia that may be leaving their car outside your property for 10 to 12 hours at a clip. So those are just some of the moving parts that we're all trying to deal with.
Sure.
And some of these things, believe it or not, as much as we're talking about it, it sounds like common sense. It's low-hanging fruit, things that we can pick off the tree. And we would certainly ease traffic parking congestion in the borough. But I can tell you that Narberth is no different than any other community, any other township, borough, or village in the Commonwealth. Parking can always be an issue for any locale. So, I think that I fully support the executive staff that we have in management here in the borough. Sean, Matt, and Ed and I work closely together as a team. And myself, like the others in an appointed position, I truly believe that we are making the right decision to make sure that we're fully compliant with whatever is in ordinance when it comes to parking enforcement, because it will be a vulnerability for us. And I think it was a right decision to make sure that the visitor list was in fact discontinued. It was no longer sustainable with the new model.
Final comment. A resident brought up to me recently, to your point about using driveways, is when we have the snow emergency, there really is no problem.
That's right.
When folks use their driveway, we can actually all comfortably fit on one side of the road. So it's kind of a gentle reminder that, again, the utilization of driveways really does ease some of the burden of our streets.
If you have one, you should use it for all of your multiple cars. Fran has
I just wanted to add that from our point of view, parking in here to corner zones is the most dangerous thing.
You were headed in my direction, Fran. Go ahead.
Especially overnight.
Yep.
Because if we get a fire, the apparatus comes from every direction. It doesn't just go.
Right.
People might say, well, you'll take a right and then you'll take a left and you're right there. But we have assist companies coming, and depending on the location at a hydrant, apparatus has to come from another direction, and a car parked in a here to corner zone can be like a 2-minute delay, and 2 minutes is a long time when somebody's house is on fire. So you got to back up and pull forward and back up, and even with the new piece of apparatus we have that is smaller and more maneuverable and turns better, fire trucks are big and this town is small, and if you get 2 cars at the end of the block in here to corner zones, you're basically cutting off access to the street. And now we've got to drag hose instead of being able to get within proximity to where the fire is. And
I appreciate that, Fran. I'm glad you
dangerous.
brought it up, because it is part of the conversation that needs to be had. And my favorite example of this is, on North Narberth, where the laundromat and the Great American is, it's a one-way as you come down. On the left side, people feel completely free, because it says no parking, to leave their car there, run in and out and do their business, whatever they're doing on the street. And it is, as you said, no parking here to corner, and inevitably somebody's there. The biggest, and now that's marked, thankfully, and they are in violation, so we know about that. But when you go down Haverford and stand in front of Rickland's, where the last parking space is literally within inches of the crosswalk. And so we have this inconsistency of where too close to corner is, and I think that's something that we talked about as far as McMahon, maybe last year or the year before. I'm losing track of time, that, we had that conversation that we need to have this consistency, and someone must have thought about this before this conversation, about what the law is, what the, how close, how far it should be from a crosswalk or a corner. So I don't think we're reinventing the wheel here, but it is a piece of information that must be added to the parking conversation.
I believe the state code is 30 feet from a stop sign, 20 feet from an intersection.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you.
And I think it also links into not only where we park and how we park, but what are the fines? What are the fines?
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely.
$15 for a parking ticket is still more cost effective than paying for a parking garage in the city. So $15 a day, have at it.
Sure.
So if we want to change behavior, we have to think about what's the mechanism to use to help that along also.
Right. I completely agree. And anything else on this subject? Thank you. We have members of the public here, or a member of the public. Is there something you'd like to address the Public Safety Committee? Sure. Anything else? New business, old business? Anything you want to talk about? Did I skip something? Did I miss something, Sean?
I should have put public comment on the agenda, but I will next month.
Well, you're fired. Thank you so very much. We'll meet next month. We'll bring some information going forward. Please, please, please look at the parking study so we can have that larger conversation next month. And thank you all for coming. We are adjourned.
Wait, wait a second.